Hey guys, and welcome back to another episode of Food School Smarter, Stronger, Leaner podcast. And this introduction to a podcast that you're about to hear is being recorded for you from Bologna, Italy. Italy is one of my favorite places on earth, if not the favorite place on earth. Every time I come here, I feel like I'm getting high all the time. I don't know, the energy, the weather, people, culture, amazing food, nutritious and delicious. I just feel so much better, and I felt like I needed to recover from all the cold of Siberia and Helsinki. And so I came to Bologna, Italy, and I'm already feeling its positive effect on me. The episode you are about to hear was recorded in Helsinki with an amazing guy, Irvin. Is a nutrition science researcher and writer with an expertise in ketogenic dieting. Chris holds a master's degree in exercise and nutrition science and spent his time in graduate school studying the ketogenic diet for performance and therapeutic applications. Chris is the education manager at Perfect Keto and strives to make the ketogenic diet easy and keto science accessible to everyone. Chris, by the way, guys, is the co-author of this amazing book. I believe this is the best, well-written and scientifically based practical book on ketogenic diet. The book is called Keto Answers, simplifying everything you need to know about the world's most confusing diet. And guys, the title is true. All the science that has been done, all the research, all the mistakes and do's and don't do's, everything is covered in this book. Like, if you don't want to be guessing, but actually want to do ketogenic diet according to science, to the best evidence that we have, this is the book you need to pick up. I got it, and this is like one of my favorite books on ketogenic nutrition. It's also not, one of those books where an author is in love with the diet and he wants to convert everyone into following this diet. No, this book is about the best evidence about this particular way of eating, and how, if you decide to do it for your own personal reason, how to do it properly. And on this podcast episode, we are talking about who's ketogenic diet for. If you're an athlete, like, is it good for you? And depending on what kind of athlete you are, what's the best evidence for ketogenic diet for athletes, and how it works, and how you can do it if as an athlete, as a professional athlete, or maybe just as an exerciser. Also, we talk about fat loss and ketogenic diet. Of course, a lot of people do start ketogenic diet because of fat loss, weight maintenance. And so we are talking about, is it the best diet for weight loss, for fat loss, and why it works for so many people, and why it might not work for you. We're also talking about our personal practice. I've been practicing keto for 6 years most of the time. Like, I never really got off it. Chris been following it, I don't know for how many years, but probably for many, many years. And this is an amazing conversation, two people who love this lifestyle, but also who love science, and who are on a mission to help people to improve their health, well-being, their energy levels, to live longer and perform better and just look and feel awesome. We are talking about this lifestyle, this nutrition approach that might not work for everyone, but it's pretty damn good way of eating and living, because it's also a lifestyle. It's not just food. So tune in and stay tuned for our fascinating, awesome, entertaining, and down-to-earth, scientifically based conversation about keto. And of course, if you are someone on a keto diet, if you are just starting out, or if you are someone who's still, who's been practicing keto but have a lot of questions and not sure about a lot of things, so pick up this book. It's going to be a great addition to your keto library, or start your library with this one. It's a good one. So without further ado, let's listen to our conversation with Chris. And by the way, guys, as usual, till next time, eat better daily.
After that initial push that we had in September, we still have people that are interested in it, and they're going and finding the book on their own, despite the fact that we're not really doing much promotional stuff for it right now. So that's definitely a good sign.
Yeah, but I read the book, and I think it's like the best book on practical keto at the moment. And you also guys covered all the science, but just enough so people understand it, but not get overwhelmed with all the like scientific details.
Yeah. Well, appreciate that. I think that was definitely the goal. Is we wanted to show enough science to show that we've done our homework and that we've put in time to research this and put out credible, backed by science answers. But we also wanted to kind of meet people where they're at and make sure that we didn't make it too complex. And I think that a lot of times people, when they jump into a new diet, they just want to be told what to do. And I think that when you have a little bit of the why and you kind of understand, how the body works and why we're recommending this way of eating, I think it makes it a lot more powerful. And I think it's a good way to help people improve their adherence to a diet when they know exactly, this is what happens when you don't follow a diet like this, and this is what happens when you do follow a diet like this. Tends to, I think, give people a better picture of what's going on. So that's at least the hope, is that we're hope that we get that point across to people.
Yeah, I mean, I personally really believe in that, in what you're saying, because once people understand better what they're doing and why they're doing and how it works in their body, they're more motivated to continue, but they also know how to navigate certain situations without, following every rule in the book, but kind of like following their own intuition based on what they learned from books like this. So
Definitely.
it's amazing work. And Chris, tell our listeners a little bit more about how you got into keto and into doing this book with Anthony Gustin, the founder of Perfect Keto. What's your story? How did you get into all of this?
Yeah, so I have to go back a few years to kind of get to the root of it. But I first heard about keto. I was coming out of undergrad. During my undergrad, I was studying exercise science and nutrition, and that was really my main focus was just exercise science. I was more into the human performance side of things. When I graduated from undergrad, my plan was to start working as a performance coach, and I was studying to get my CSCS, and I was planning on going and becoming a professional basketball strength conditioning coach. Was kind of my dream job that I was shooting for at the time. And I spent a year after college working at a performance institute where I was training youth and collegiate athletes and high school athletes, and I was introduced to the kind of the sport of bodybuilding during this time, which inevitably kind of turned me to look at nutrition a lot more. When I was in college, I played basketball and baseball, so I knew that nutrition was important as it relates to performing at a high level when you're playing a collegiate sport, but I hadn't yet taken a deep dive into studying nutrition yet. And, when I was introduced to bodybuilding, that was kind of a big piece of the puzzle there is getting your nutrition on point. So I started studying nutrition there and started getting really into it. So I applied to go back to school to get my master's in exercise and nutrition science. And I was going to be attending the University of Tampa down in Tampa, Florida. And I went to a conference about 2 months or 3 months before I started attending school, and it was just a general sports science conference. To this point, I had never heard about the ketogenic diet. It wasn't anything that was taught to me in my undergrad or anything like that. And at the conference was Dr. D'Agostino and Dr. Jeff Volek. So for anybody who's familiar with the keto space, I always refer to these guys as if there was a Mount Rushmore of keto scientists, these would be the two guys at the center of it. So so they were presenting and talking about keto. And at the time, I really only thought about the ketogenic diet as a weight loss diet. So I didn't really consider it for myself. I just saw this as, this makes sense when you break down the biochemistry of it. It's a very great diet for weight loss. So, I recommended it to a few family members and friends who were always asking for advice on weight loss. And that was kind of the end of it for a short period of time. And then when I started at the University of Tampa, my first class was a sports nutrition class. And we talked about the ketogenic diet on day one. And we were talking about the ketogenic diet for endurance performance. And then we were starting to dive into some of the new, at the time, this was back in 2015. So there was some new and novel research coming out around keto for other types of performance. It's pretty well established that it was a great diet for endurance at that time, but there's a lot more research coming out about other types of human performance. So from that moment, I was kind of hooked on it. I jumped on the diet myself, made a bunch of mistakes. There wasn't a lot of info out there. There wasn't a lot of how-to guides yet, so I was kind of figuring it out for myself. And then at the same time, I started studying the ketogenic diet for sports performance in the lab at the University of Tampa. So we were doing research with collegiate athletes and just college students, just looking at how the ketogenic diet impacts different measures of performance, like vertical jump, power, strength, training volume, different things like that, and then also body composition as well. So I did that for about the first half of my graduate schooling, and I was really into it. I followed the diet. I've been following the diet myself for 4 years, so I stuck to it during this time. And about halfway through my grad schooling, I picked up a book from Travis Christofferson. I just kind of stumbled upon it. It's a book called Tripping Over the Truth, which I highly recommend. Travis is one of my favorite writers, and this book was definitely a book that made a pretty profound impact on my journey. And this book basically just broke down, kind of the metabolic side of disease, and the big core part of the book was talking about the ketogenic diet and cancer, and how there was a lot of research out there about this, and I had never heard about this at that point. So I became super interested in it, and I just dove in the next 3 months and just started studying cancer, reading every single paper that I could, reading a lot of Dr. Seyfried's work, a lot of Dr. Poff's work, a lot of different people like that, just trying to read everything that was out there. And, I end up finding out that I sit down and I read Dr. Angela Poff's dissertation for her doctorate dissertation, and then I find out that she's actually a guest professor at our university there in Tampa. And for anybody who's not familiar with her work, she's somebody who has done incredible work around the ketogenic diet, hyperbaric oxygen therapy, and exogenous ketones for different metabolic for different diseases that are related to metabolic dysfunction, like cancer. And so I immediately tried to get in contact with her and started doing some volunteering at the lab over there at USF in Tampa. And it was a really great experience because, before that I was studying keto in humans for performance, and now I was getting to get a look at, what these scientists were doing, looking at the ketogenic diet in animal models for different, metabolic therapies. So it was super into that, and it was a great experience. Got to learn from some of the top minds in the industry. And then from that moment, I kind of hit a crossroad where I had to decide if I wanted to pursue my PhD, which was always my plan at that point, or go a different route. And, one of the things I kind of had a coming to moment where I just realized that, all this research that was out there about keto for diabetes, keto for Alzheimer's, cancer, Parkinson's, all this stuff had existed for years, and it was out there, and people weren't able to find it. The hard work that was done by these scientists were getting locked away in these journals that people either didn't have access to, or they weren't able to really interpret the studies to know how to apply this to their life. So I kind of saw this as an opportunity, and something that I want to do is become more of an educator and somebody that could, take this science and break it down in a way that people could understand it, and they could see the power in this diet and this lifestyle, and then impact their health accordingly. So and then at the same time too, and this kind of ropes into how I ended up getting hooked up with Dr. Gustin here at Perfect Keto, is I saw that the industry was going to have a really profound impact. So when I first started studying the ketogenic diet, there was really no industry yet. There weren't all the low carb companies out there that were making bars and exogenous ketone drinks and protein powders and all the things like that. So when I first started seeing companies pop up, which Perfect Keto was one of the first exogenous ketone companies that I came across. And at the time I was studying exogenous ketones in grad school. We were studying just the raw powders, doing a lot of research with them. And now they were available on the market. And I saw this as a huge opportunity to progress this movement forward, because I think, the industry plays a big role in progressing a movement forward. And that can be in a good way, and it can be in a bad way. We've seen this in the keto space, where a lot of companies are taking advantage of this keto movement and putting out pretty low quality products to take advantage of people who are searching for low carb options. But then there were companies like Perfect Keto who I thought were doing a really good job, and they were doing it the right way. And that was a mission that I really wanted to jump on with. So I hopped on with Perfect Keto just over a year ago. Mm-hmm. And one of the first projects that Dr. Gustin came to me and said was, we need to come out with a book that puts all of the information and answers all the questions that people need to know about keto in one place. So the problem now is, because there's so much information out there's so many people that are, kind of jockeying for position on Google and trying to get, the best article out there answering a certain question about keto. It ends up being really hard for the consumer to, figure out, is this information credible? Is it backed by science? Is this somebody just trying to sell me something? And then people are bouncing all around and they're not sure, this website says one thing, but then this website says the complete opposite. So we really wanted to have this resource that would answer every question that we thought somebody would have about a ketogenic diet. And the way that we did that is we sat down with people who were at different stages of their ketogenic journey. So that's, people who were just thinking about starting keto or new to the keto diet. And then there was people who were, been following it for 6 months, 8 months. And then there were people who have been following it for a couple of years. And we just kind of asked them, what questions they had. And then we would answer those questions and then see, once you get this question answered, what's the next question that you have? And that's kind of the way that we wrote the book was, when somebody, we wanted somebody to be able to read the book from start to finish and be able to get every question answered. But at the same time, they could also flip around the book and search for a question and get it, and then just get their answer to that single question. So that was the plan for it. And it took about 6 months to write the book. It was a pretty heads down project. We didn't work on much else during that time. That was kind of all we were working on. And then once it was done, we went through about another 4 to 6 months of kind of getting it put together and getting the graphic design made and everything. And then we put that out in mid-September. So it's been a pretty fun journey to get to this point and to see how the keto space has really blown up over the last 4 to 5 years. And I'm excited to see where it goes as well.
You've done really, first of all, thank you for sharing your journey. It's really kind of, I don't know, it seems really logical, like, your interests, your background, and how you transitioned to where you are right now. And also, you did a really great job with this book, because it's written in a really simple yet scientific language, like popular science that people can understand. And plus, you have answers to almost every question, at least questions that I'm getting from my clients who come to me and they're like, I want to do keto, help me do this.
Yeah.
And they have all of these questions, and you really put a lot of work into it, especially into like more into details of it, how to actually do keto and supplements and different kinds of keto and keto foods and what people should avoid, what people should be aware of. And it's really an amazing book, and I recommend it to everyone who is interested in keto, who has a lot of questions about keto. But let's answer some of those questions for our listeners today. The first question actually that probably a lot of people have, if they are not on a keto diet and they don't know a lot about it, like, should I do keto? Who is it for and who is it not? And is it really worth it?
Yeah, definitely. So, one of the things that we always talk about too is as much as we promote the ketogenic diet, we talk about the ketogenic diet, we're not really the same as a lot of other people in this keto space where we believe that, keto is the only way to attack your diet, or that, the traditional way that people look at the ketogenic diet is the only way that we should be looking at the way that we eat. But we always talk about keto because generally, what I believe are the best nutrition practices, keto tends to encompass a lot of those beliefs. So that's why I always tend to recommend it. But when you ask the question about, is keto good for everybody, there's a couple of different ways to look at that. So one is that there's really not anybody out there that the ketogenic diet is not good for. Now, there are a couple of conditions of disorders with fat metabolism where a ketogenic diet might not be advised, but those are extremely rare. And then there are some other conditions, some not conditions, but just things to take into consideration where if you have somebody who is, maybe has a poor relationship with food and is kind of tiptoeing the line of like an eating disorder, a ketogenic diet where you are restricting a lot of different foods out of their diet, it could be something that you might want to ease into rather than going full bore into it. Just because for some people who are like that can be a little bit of a daunting thing. But besides that, there's the ketogenic diet has been studied in youth populations. It was first developed for children with epilepsy in the 20s. So we have a lot of research with children in the ketogenic diet. We've studied it in men, women, elderly, healthy populations, many different diseased populations. So we know that it's safe for everybody to follow. And that's important because there's a lot of misconceptions out there around, not only just the common misconceptions like, dietary fat's bad for you and red meat's bad for you and things like that, but also the misconceptions around, children shouldn't be eating this way because it can impact their growth, or, women shouldn't be eating this way because we see some impacts in thyroid hormones sometimes. And there's a lot of it just kind of shows you that there's things that need to be adjusted to tailor this ketogenic diet for everybody. And there's not a one-size-fits-all approach. And the reason why some people have complications with the ketogenic diet is because we do take this one-size-fits-all approach to keto, which just doesn't work. Everybody needs to tailor the diet specific to their goals and where they're at and everything like that. But when you talk about who the ketogenic diet is really good for, the ketogenic diet is especially good for anybody who's suffering from any bit of insulin resistance. So to kind of dive into that a little bit, insulin resistance is kind of the first thing that occurs that starts the trend towards prediabetes and diabetes, but it's also something that plays a big role in almost all of the chronic diseases that we're faced with today. And if you pick up the Keto Answers book, we talk about this a lot. We really drive home insulin and inflammation and how those things really are responsible for a lot of different conditions out there. And to give kind of a little bit of an understanding of what this means is when we consume carbohydrates are broken down into glucose, and we have an increase in our blood glucose. And when we have an increase in our blood glucose, our pancreas releases insulin, and the insulin, as a simple way to look at it, is it's a hormone that basically talks to our cells and says, hey, open up the doors so glucose can come in and be used for energy. And this is a good thing. There's nothing wrong with this process. It's a way that we can use carbs and use them for energy. There's nothing wrong with this. But the problem with this process is that if it's frequently overstimulated, which would happen from chronically over-consuming carbohydrates, then we develop what's known as insulin resistance. And that means that the hormone insulin is basically no longer communicating well with our cells, and it's no longer able to tell the cells to open up the doors to let glucose in. So then people have very high levels of blood glucose, and they continue producing insulin, and then this process gets burnt out, and then that's eventually how, down the road diabetes can occur. So for these people, these people are no longer effectively metabolizing carbohydrates anymore. So what's great about a ketogenic diet is one, you're not eating carbohydrates anymore, but two, you're changing your body's primary fuel source to burning fat, as well as producing these molecules known as ketone molecules, which are unique energy sources made from the breakdown of fat that, even the insulin resistant cell can still use ketones for energy. So you're able to provide your body with a fuel source that it can use, rather than taking the traditional approach that many, diabetics and pre-diabetics may take of, taking exogenous insulin and then, continuing to eat carbohydrates. That's really just going to exacerbate the problem. That's not going to be a way to really solve anything. So when you look at, insulin resistance, pre-diabetes, diabetes, that's why you see, like, if you look at a company like Virta Health, this is a company that's shown that, after 2 years, they just came out with a 2-year follow-up to their study, and it's something like 60% of people on the trial had like complete reversal of type 2 diabetes using a low-carb diet. And I think it was like 80% I may be off on these numbers, but they're high. 80% were off of their diabetes medication. So, and this is with just diet intervention alone. So this is a pretty powerful thing, and this shows you how, keto is so great for these things. But the other thing here is that, like I mentioned briefly before, is that a lot of the chronic diseases that we're faced with today also display insulin resistance. So, Alzheimer's and most neurodegenerative diseases are conditions where, we're referring to these as type 3 diabetes, which is basically the brain is becoming insulin resistant. So, the brain is no longer able to get the fuel that it needs. Our brain has a massive energy demand. So now, this is how kind of starts the progression of that condition. But on a ketogenic diet, we give the brain a fuel source that not only is superior in many different ways, but it's able to be used by a brain when it can't use carbs. And when the brain is using ketones, it's not producing as much inflammation. It's actually producing some natural antioxidants, which is great for improving brain health. And the same can be said for a lot of different conditions, like cardiovascular disease, some of the common conditions that women are faced with nowadays, like PCOS. All of that is to be said that it seems like what we're seeing is that the ketogenic diet is a great diet, not only for losing weight and not only for helping people with diabetes and children with epilepsy, but also for helping reduce the risk of a lot of different conditions and the chronic diseases that we're faced with today. So, to answer that question, everybody can really be on a ketogenic diet, and I think that everybody can see benefit from a keto diet. That doesn't mean that everybody needs to be on a ketogenic diet because, for somebody who has never gone through long periods of chronically overeating carbohydrates and eating a ton of them, you might not have this insulin resistance to a degree. You may be extremely insulin sensitive. You may be a great carbohydrate utilizer. So for somebody like this, then you may not need to go full-blown keto. But when you start looking at, I'm from the U.S. here, so looking at the U.S. alone, it's like over 30 million people are diagnosed with diabetes, and that's just diabetes. We just talked about the other conditions that display insulin resistance. So when you start looking at those numbers, you start seeing how a lot of people can benefit from this ketogenic diet.
Yeah, I definitely think that a lot of people would benefit from ketogenic diet, specifically because our modern diet, especially, something similar to standard American diet that's basically universal, became universal everywhere. Like people who are suffering from all the consequences of eating that diet, keto seems to work really well for them. For me personally, why I choose to be on a keto diet, actually two reasons. Reason number one, I seem to be very sensitive to any grains, grains, bread, even gluten-free. Like for some reason, I start to put on weight and I can't control my hunger when I eat those foods. Whereas like on keto diet, my hunger is really natural. Like I get hungry, I eat, I stop eating naturally when I'm no longer hungry, and I can go without food for like the whole day and eat once a day, and that really works for me. Whereas like again, on a higher carbohydrate diet, I was never able to do that for some reason. But then also, I wanted to ask you also about athletes. I coach a lot of athletes, physique athletes, also people into CrossFit, and they often ask me like, is keto really good for me and my performance, and whether and how they can modify it to make it better for their specific needs.
Yeah, it's a great question because the traditional thought behind really any type of sports performance has been that carbohydrates are the primary fuel source, and the thought of carbing up has been used for decades, where people think that they need to consume massive amounts of carbs before any sort of physical performance. And the first kind of domino that fell against this was when we started seeing Professor Tim Noakes was one really big player in this movement, showing that carbs really weren't important for endurance performance. So we'll kind of start there. He was able to start showing that when you're on a ketogenic diet, you're able to tap into your stored body fat, and even in the leanest of athletes, you're going to have 20 to 25,000 calories stored as fat. As opposed to really only being able to store about 2,000 calories as glycogen, which is our stored form of carbohydrates. So when you're an endurance athlete, for instance, if you're consuming carbs, so you eat a bolus of carbs and you're able to store, and you have, if you have full glycogen stores, your fuel source is really the carbs that you ate, the calories from your stored glycogen, and then that's it. Because a lot of these athletes don't have metabolisms that are trained for them to very effectively tap into fat. So on a ketogenic diet, though, you're able to tap into this larger fuel source where you have a massive amount of fuel available. And that's why we've seen such incredible research from like Dr. Jeff Volek out of Ohio State University showing that, ultra endurance athletes are just seeing incredible improvements in performance when they're following a ketogenic diet. So, that's been pretty well established for a while now that we know that keto is fantastic for endurance performance. But, then the question kind of comes up about, well, what about like strength athletes and what about power athletes? And, the research here, admittedly, there's not a ton of research on this topic. And, a lot of the research that is out there is pretty flawed. So, we've seen a lot of people like to use studies and say, this study shows that a low carb diet impacts strength or impacts power or muscular endurance or things like that. And when you go look at the studies that these people are using, these are, 3-day studies or 1-week studies where they're basically, taking somebody, doing a performance measure when they're on their standard diet, putting them on a keto diet for like 3 days and then testing their measures again. And for anybody who's followed keto, we know that there's a keto adaptation period that occurs where our body is transitioning to being a carb burner to being a fat burner and a ketone producer and utilizer. So this takes time, and it's very common for somebody to see a big dip in their performance in their first couple of weeks of starting keto, which kind of brings up the first recommendation for an athlete is that if you are somebody who's looking to use keto and you have competitions and you're trying to perform at a high level, it's something that you want to do in your off season. You want to become keto adapted in the off season because you don't want to have this dip in performance in the middle of a season or leading up to a competition. But when we start to look at studies that are a lot longer that allow for this keto adaptation to occur, we see that people, their strength returns. And in some cases it gets better. Sometimes it just stays the same. We see that their power can get back to where it was. And there's a couple things to consider with these types of studies too, is that, if these studies aren't providing an adequate training stimulus to induce improvements in these areas, then you're probably not going to see improvements in these areas. So, a diet alone is not going to be what is going to make you good or bad at performance. It's going to help complement what you're doing with your training. So that's kind of always an important thing to take into consideration with it. But, it does seem that, and there's a lot of anecdotal stories since we don't have a ton of research, and there is a little bit of research showing that keto can be really good for strength and stuff. And I think one thing to take into consideration here is that the traditional recommendations of keto probably need to be adjusted. So you made mention of like how can an athlete adjust the diet to better suit performance, and this can kind of be shown in a study from 2018, I believe it was, where they took men and women. It was kind of a general population, so people like myself, just everyday people who were working out, and they put them on the standard keto diet of 20% protein, 75% carbs, 75% fat and 5% carbs. And they showed that these people lost lean body mass. I think they saw some decrements in their performance. And the point here is that the traditional keto diet, we have to remember, was invented for children with epilepsy, which is not the same use for, let's say an athlete who is trying to improve their, 1 rep max or something like that. So we need to adjust the diet, and usually this adjustment needs to come from, eating more calories and then eating enough protein. So not being afraid to go over that 20 to 25% protein limit and actually going a little bit closer to, maybe 30 to 35%. Or even 40% protein for some of these people, I think is important. But the other thing that I think is really important to point out about this conversation is that there's a big difference between professional athletes and people who their primary focus is improving performance for a career versus, an everyday average Joe like myself. So, if I'll use any professional athlete, you can use as an example here. If their primary goal is performance, then, they need to try and see if the ketogenic diet works for them. I think it can work for most people, but they need to try it. And then if it doesn't work and it does lead to decrements in their performance, then it's probably not a great fit for them. But for the average Joes out there like myself, who, my primary goal is being healthy, it's improving my lifespan, it's, staying at a healthy weight, having low inflammation, keeping my brain working well. And then performance is just one of the other things that I'm focused on. So for me, if I am able to stay healthy and improve my health, and still be able to train at the intensity that I was training at before, then that's a win for me, whether or not I'm making dramatic improvements in my strength. And I think and the other thing to consider here too is that, comparing the elite athletes versus the average Joes, you're going to see a big difference. Like an elite athlete who is already in the top 1% of athletic abilities in the world, it's going to be hard for them to show improvements when they're already up there towards the top. Whereas, you look at a study like in 2016, there was a study published in kind of average Joes, again, just doing CrossFit and following a keto diet for 12 weeks. They all saw improvements in their performance because they were getting healthier. So, these people were reducing inflammation. They were probably improving their body composition. They were, feeling better, more motivated, had better endurance. So all these people showed improvements in their training. So I think that's another important thing to take into consideration is that you really have to decide what bucket you fall in. Are you an elite athlete who's trying to get that extra 1% to gain an advantage over somebody? Or are you just kind of an average Joe who is just exercising or, competing with friends and working out and stuff like that? That's probably going to be a different approach to your diet.
Yeah, I totally agree with that no matter what diet people choose, they should always, first and foremost, think about their unique lifestyle and physiology and what their goals are. And then also, I usually recommend to people to measure important for them metrics, like maybe for somebody it's blood glucose, for somebody it's cholesterol, for somebody it's inflammation, and then try different diets and see how it changes those metrics.
Definitely. Yeah, I mean it's important, and it is hard with some of those things because we do have some misunderstandings and misconceptions around even things like cholesterol and stuff like that. But I think that is the general concept of that is great, is that we should be focused on health first. And I think that like the fitness industry as a whole has always made aesthetics and the way that you look more important than your health. And then on the other side, like the food industry and like the dietary guidelines that are out there have always made chasing numbers with your cholesterol, things that we don't really know what that means, and things that we don't fully understand, or at least the people making the recommendations don't fully understand. They make that the primary goal, and everybody's going to have a different thing that they need to target. I mean, for somebody, if you have high blood pressure and that's your most that's your biggest risk factor for disease, and that's something that you need to focus on. If you have a family history of Alzheimer's, then that's probably the thing that you need to focus on most. If your CRP, which is the most common inflammatory marker, is through the roof, then that's probably the thing you need to be focusing on. So, and at the same time, like I said, when you're following keto, and if you're becoming more insulin sensitive, and you're burning fat and you're improving your body composition, you're going to change your body in a way that's going to be conducive of better performance for most people.
Yeah, I agree. The next question, that I get from a lot of people is keto the best diet for weight loss and fat loss? Should people go on it if their primary goal right now is fat loss?
Yeah, so this is a good question because the way that this question can be positioned is it's almost frustrating to me sometimes, because the ketogenic diet is so good for weight loss that it takes away from, people think that it's only a weight loss diet. So then they'll forget all about the other benefits that it has. But, at its core, the ketogenic diet is the best diet out there for weight loss. I feel very confident in saying that. I think that it's when you look at how the diet happens, I mean, basically, as a simple understanding for people, when you have low insulin levels, which happens from having lower blood glucose, low insulin means that you are burning fat. When insulin is elevated, insulin directly inhibits fat burning. So I think that understanding right there is a pretty easy way to look at why keto is the best diet for weight loss. And this is why you're seeing 100, 200 pound transformations from people, is they're keeping their body in a fat burning state all of the time. And there's really no other diet out there that does that. Now, there's some research comparing keto to other diets and showing that, it does show that keto is superior. And but there's a couple other reasons why keto is the best diet for weight loss. It's not just that you will lose a ton of weight on it. It's also how you're doing it. So, calories is kind of the first thing to point out here, where calories are important in any sort of weight loss. They do play a role, but they appear to play a lot less of a role on a ketogenic diet. And the reason for this is that when you are in a state of ketosis and your cells are burning ketones for fuel, they can have a shift in the way that they are programmed, the way that they work, and they can become a little bit more what we would consider to be inefficient, which, inefficient meaning that they will burn more fat than they actually need, which, inefficient sounds like a bad term, but when you have, 200 pounds of fat to lose, an inefficient cell that is burning way more fat than it needs is actually a great thing. And so that's one of the reasons why we have research out there that shows that people on a ketogenic diet will lose more weight than people on another diet, despite the fact that people on the ketogenic diet are eating more calories. There's actually studies out there that show that. So that's the first biggest thing, is that you don't have to put yourself in a massive calorie deficit or starve yourself to see progress on keto. Like I said, the calories do matter, but they're not the most important factor. And then, to complement that, you mentioned earlier in the episode, you said that how keto keeps your hunger under control. And that's another big reason too. Most diets leave people extremely hungry. They feel low energy. They don't have the energy to add exercise. And they're always dealing with hunger and struggling to not overeat and kind of ruin their progress. But on a ketogenic diet, not only, we have our blood sugar stable, which is a great way to prevent us from having a lot of hunger, but there's also changes in our hunger hormone signaling, which has been shown in a lot of different studies where, we have changes in our hunger hormones that promote more satiety or fullness and take away cravings and hunger. So, for somebody who is trying to lose weight, it's obviously going to be great to not be craving cake all the time or to not be really hungry during the middle of the day. But then also, the increase in energy is going to be huge, because if you're trying to lose weight, having the energy and the motivation to go to the gym to get that extra work in and to help you on your weight loss journey is also going to be beneficial, which, when you're not in a massive calorie deficit, like you might have to be on another diet, you can have more energy because of that. So all of those things considered is the reason why I believe that the ketogenic diet is the best diet for weight loss. At the mechanistic level, keeping insulin levels low is going to be the best way to lose weight. And on keto, you're pretty much always going to be doing that. But then those other complementary factors, I think, is what gives the diet the most bang for its buck.
Yeah, I totally agree. The only thing, that I think a lot of people miss trying to get, it usually actually only for people who are trying to get extra lean. They think that if it's fat, the calories don't matter. Like they eating, for example, nut butters or coconut and olive oil, a lot of it, and then they're questioning this diet, like, why am I not losing weight and I'm not super shredded, even though I have like no carbs.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. And, that kind of goes back to that conversation about the traditional keto macronutrients. We always call keto a high fat diet. We always say 75% of your calories for fat, and in some cases more. Some people recommend 80+% of your calories from fat. And that, I just don't think that that's necessary. I think that, when I first started keto, I was definitely doing that. I've coached people over the course of my journey and helped them. And, it really seems like that high fat approach, I think, is a great thing for people who are new to the diet, because, fat is satiating. People need to be providing their bodies with fat as they're transitioning to burning fat, because, for somebody who's really insulin resistant, it's going to take your body a little bit of time to become a fat burner. So you want to make sure that you're providing enough fat in your diet. So I think that at the beginning, when you first start, this high fat approach is great, but over time, I think that fat should be looked at as more of a lever for adjusting your calories. So if you're trying to go in a calorie deficit for various reasons, I think fat is that lever that you can pull down. You can lower your fat intake. Or if you're trying to increase your calories, fat is a great lever to push up to increase your calories. So, I think that for most people, like I'm not somebody, I've gotten to the point where I don't add much fat to my diet anywhere. I eat fatty foods. So like I'll have fatty fish, or I'll have, I eat a lot of red meat. I'll have eggs. But I don't really put a lot of oils on things. I don't really use a lot of like fatty salad dressings. I'm not dousing things in butter. That's not really my approach. And I think for most people, they would probably see a lot of benefit from just sticking to eating fatty foods and then just adding the fat in for whenever they need to get a boost in calories.
Yeah, that's my approach also. Eat fatty foods and don't eat that much fat in a bottle or in a package of any sort, and usually people do really well. And also for me personally, when I'm trying to get extra lean for a photo shoot, for example, all I do is cut down on extra fat, and my body became, I think, that sensitive to those fat calories that whenever I do that, I just lose my body fat like almost instantly.
Yeah, definitely. And it is a little bit different for everybody. I think everybody needs to make some, like I've seen working with some people where, increasing protein and decreasing fat is a great way to like push through like a stall in weight loss or fat loss. And then I've seen the opposite work as well. So I think that it's important for people to self-experiment. It's kind of what I always say is like, there's no, macronutrient calculators are great for giving you a baseline, but you need to test your responses. You need to see what works best for you. You need to make adjustments to your diet. And I think when you learn to do that, then you kind of learn more tools to put in your tool belt for how to adjust your diet according to what goals you're seeking after. So I think that that's a very big thing for people to remember.
Yes, definitely. Try things, see how they work, and then if they work, leave them as they are. If they don't work, try something else.
Exactly.
Also, Chris, let's tell people a little bit more about practicality of keto foods, everyday practicality, meaning what your day of keto looks like. What should most of the folks on keto diet try to kind of create when it comes to keto meal plan? Maybe you can walk us through your regular day of keto eating, like what it looks like, because a lot of people also confused, like, should I just eat zero carbs, no vegetables, only like, protein and fat, or what does it look for you, and what should other people like try to create when it comes to keto meal plan?
Yeah, so for me, at this point, I actually eat a little bit closer to a carnivore diet. I would say that I'm actually about 80 to 90% carnivore. I started experimenting with carnivore about 1.5 to 2 years ago and really liked the way that I felt. But the diet, admittedly, the diet's a little bit too boring for me to do it 100% all the time. So I'll do 100% carnivore for a few weeks, and then I'll kind of fall into like 80 to 90% carnivore lifestyle. So that's kind of what my diet looks like right now. So, what that is, I fast some days. So some days I'll do intermittent fasting for 16 to 18 hours, but most days now I'm eating breakfast where I'll have usually it's eggs and some sort of like a collagen protein shake, or I'll do a mix of like some organ meats, like some liver, beef liver, or some beef heart in the morning, and then for lunch I'll do ground beef or a steak or fatty fish or something like that. And then for dinner, if I'm doing like an 85 to 90% carnivore for dinner, it'll be when I usually incorporate a little bit of vegetables. So that'll be, some sort of red meat again, and then like Brussels sprouts or broccoli or asparagus or something like that. So that's the approach that I take. But, obviously carnivore is another level of restricted type diets that is probably not for the beginner out there. For somebody who's never done a low carb diet, I would start there before I would recommend jumping into carnivore. And carnivore might not be for everybody. So, but I think the best recommendation I can give for anybody is to just eat real food. I think that that's the most important thing that we can do. Even if you're not following a keto diet, whatever diet you're following, if you focus on eating real food and avoiding processed foods, you're going to make a huge impact in your health. The processed foods out there contain a lot of added sugar. They contain a lot of filler ingredients and a lot of different chemicals and things that just aren't good for our health. And they're things that our bodies aren't familiar with and things that can just be damaging to our health. So I think that if you can eat real food, I think that's going to be the best case. So for people who are trying to figure out, okay, I want to start keto, how do I divide my meals up? I actually would take a much easier approach to this, and I would get an approved food list. So if anybody needs one of these, you can actually go to perfectketo.com. And if you go to perfectketo.com/keto-kickstart, that's kind of a starter program that we made last year for people to start keto. And it's a free program. You just enter your email and you get all the information. And what you'll get here is you'll get a list of approved foods. So our list of approved foods is a little bit different from everybody else's list because we try to stick more to like whole real foods. We don't recommend a lot of dairy because, unless you have access to good raw dairy, Most of the dairy is highly processed, so we kind of like recommend, keeping that intake pretty low. But I think you get a food list of what to eat and what not to eat, and then you just follow that and you eat foods to satiety. Because I think for most people out there, what's going to happen is you start eating these keto foods, even if you're overeating a little bit when you first start, over time as you start becoming a fat burner, I think that you're going to start seeing reductions in your hunger, and that's going to lead to you kind of controlling your food intake a little bit more. So I don't really think that everybody needs to go crazy in macro calculating and calorie tracking. I think that, if you're stuck and you're not seeing progress, that's probably a great thing to look at. But for somebody who's just starting, I think the best thing you can do is just start eating, look at the approved food list and look at the foods that you like and eat those foods and eat them to satiety. And then, let your body repair. When you're following a ketogenic diet, your body is repairing. You're restoring your metabolism. You're repairing damage that you've done from, depending on how bad your diet was pre-keto, you're repairing a lot of that. So I think that if you do that, you're going to set yourself up for a lot of success. And I don't think that you need to turn, and, also this approach is going to be what allows you to turn this into a more sustainable lifestyle and a more practical lifestyle. Because, if I sit here every day and tell you that you need to eat these foods for breakfast and these foods for lunch, well, if you hate those foods, then this is going to be a diet that you may stick to for 30 days, but then you're probably going to fall off of it. So in the essence of trying to get people to adopt a real food diet more long term, I would say find real foods and eat the ones that you like.
Yeah, I love it. I think this is the approach that most people need to understand. A lot of times people just get lost into all these keto supplements or keto bars or keto cookies or something else.
Yeah.
And forget that the best keto food is like real food that is not that rich in carbohydrates. And it's not that difficult to figure out, once you kind of understand what carbohydrates are and where they are. And what's your take on vegetables and keto? Like, should people get really precise about counting their carbohydrates from non-starchy vegetables, like, Brussels sprouts or broccoli or things like that?
I'm not really a big believer that that's necessary if overeating fiber can definitely have some complications, that can give you some GI distress and that can make you not feel as well and make you feel more bloated and stuff. So if that's a problem that you're having from overeating vegetables, then it probably would be worth it for you to track those and keep them in check. But besides that, if you're speaking about lower glycemic vegetables, leafy green vegetables, these things aren't going to be a big contributor to a spike in blood sugar. So I don't think that it's something to worry about. And I feel like for a lot of people, if you're really hung up in tracking how much broccoli you're eating in a day, then it's probably just not a sustainable way to look at your diet. If you're constantly thinking about that, and you're constantly, logging your food, and you're concerned about having a few more pieces of a vegetable than what you're supposed to, I think that you're probably setting yourself up for failure. So I don't think most people need to look at it and track that heavily. I think that I will say as a caveat, I am a big fan of counting total carbs versus net carbs. I don't think that net carbs is a great approach because I think that leads to overeating of total carbs. But if you're keeping your carb intake to coming from, leafy green vegetables, it's going to be hard to eat too much of them. And I think that you're probably not going to have any problems if you go overboard, minus the fact if you have too much in it, impairs your gut health at all.
Yeah, I agree. I used to think, that, well, my personal journey, I used to think that I had to count carbs to be, I don't know, in constant ketosis or something.
Mm-hmm.
But, I noticed no matter how many broccoli I eat, it doesn't really affect my ketosis the next morning, like when I measure ketones. But what can get me in trouble if I actually start counting, but start eating foods that are not real foods, but I don't know, some chocolate sweetened with some sugar substitute with a lot of weird fibers. So those things can mess up my ketones and how I feel, and also how my digestive tract feels.
Yeah, definitely. And that's kind of a good testament too to the sticking to whole foods. And, admittedly at Perfect Keto, we make a protein bar that is intended for replacing, giving you a snack replacement and giving you something to help with your sweet tooth and something to take on the go. But the goal with this product was not to create something that people would live off of. We don't think that people should be living off of these bars or eating a lot of them, but rather when you're in a pinch, this is a great option. Or if you're somebody who, protein bar is very convenient for you, like you're on the go, leaving the gym, stuff like that, or you're hiking, whatever. A bar can be very convenient, and we wanted to make something that was better than the other things that are out there. But regardless, I think you're right. Like we need to be focusing on the real foods. That's the most important thing that we can do. And when you come to when it comes to tracking carbs too, I mean, if you're eating real foods, and we're talking about real whole foods that are consumed the way that they are supposed to be consumed, they're if it's a plant, it's grown, it's how it would occur in nature. It's not genetically modified in any way. We're eating meat that's coming from good sources. It's going to be really hard for you to eat too many carbs because real whole foods don't have a lot of carbs. And the only real whole foods that are going to have a substantial amount of carbs are going to be some starchy vegetables. And to be honest, I don't think starchy vegetables are the things that are giving people problem with their health. The things that are giving people problems with their health is the processed carbohydrates. So I think that if you're cutting out the fake food and you're eating real food, you're also going to be low carb. And I think that that's probably the best thing that you can do, and a lot more important than just worrying about tracking your carbohydrate intake. I think a lot of people think that they're coming to keto and they hear, oh, I got to keep my carbs below 30 and I'll be in ketosis. Mm-hmm. And I think they just assume that below 30 grams of carbs means ketosis. No, what matters is that you don't eat more carbs than what's going to allow your body to be in ketosis, and that's going to be different for you than it is for me. So again, that's where the self-experimentation comes in.
Yeah, totally. And Chris, as a last question, I want to be mindful of your time. You're already talking for almost an hour. That's I could be talking about this for hours and hours. But I wanted to ask you, for our listeners, what mistakes do you see people do most of the time that doesn't allow people to fully experience the benefits of ketogenic diet that they could experience if they did everything right?
Yeah, so I think that the first thing that comes to mind, there's probably two, I would say, that are really important. But the first one is not staying hydrated and replenishing electrolytes. And this is something that I made a big mistake when I first started because I didn't know about this yet, and I didn't have this understanding of the body. But when we stop eating carbs, for one, we burn through that stored glycogen that we mentioned earlier, and stored glycogen holds water. So you're going to be losing some water during this time. But also, when your insulin levels are lower, you're going to be excreting more water naturally. So when you're losing more water, you're also losing more electrolytes. So this leads to electrolyte deficiencies and dehydration. And when you hear people talk about keto flu, which are the symptoms that people get when they start keto, a lot of people think that these symptoms are symptoms of carbohydrate withdrawal. So it's something that the body has to go through as they're getting away from being a carbohydrate utilizer. But really, the majority of these symptoms are coming from electrolyte deficiencies and dehydration. So that's things like brain fog, fatigue, impaired sleep, muscle soreness and cramps, impaired mood. All of those things are a result of not having enough, sodium, magnesium, and potassium. So I think that if you focus on, you can get these things from whole foods, but I think that for most people, adding in an electrolyte supplement, I think it's going to be really beneficial for you. So if you add an electrolyte supplement in, I think you're going to get the most out of your ketogenic diet. And then the second one that I would say most mistakes people are making is just not eating enough. When we start a ketogenic diet, we focus so much on taking out certain foods, but we forget to replace those foods with things that are going to nourish our body, right? So the goal is not to be in a massive calorie deficit all of the time. The goal is not to be, starving yourself and restricting yourself. The goal is to be rewarding your body and fueling your body with good nutrients that allow it to function optimally. So if you're somebody who you're not in, this tends to, it seems like this tends to really apply for women especially. I hear all the time women coming to me and reporting a lot of side effects of keto, and then I ask them about their diet, and they're eating 1,200 calories, but they're working out 6 days a week, and it's like, well, you're just not eating enough. You're not nourishing your body properly. So I think that's the second thing that I would say most people are making mistakes on.
Yeah, when I work with clients, I always see the same patterns. And I think I just would like to add one more is sodium. Like a lot of people forget to add more as they clean up, their diet as they go keto. And especially for people like, for example, like myself, I tend to actually go lower with my blood pressure. So for me, sodium is really like the thing that makes a difference in how I feel. And how also, I perform mentally and physically. And so before I started adding sodium, like in my morning water and just extra salt on my food, my blood pressure was all over the place. And a lot of times, like my heartbeat would be irregular or I would get dizzy easily. But as soon as I started getting sodium, like I use Himalayan salt in the morning and more on my food, it all disappeared. And now whenever I feel like I'm weak, I usually add salt first, and then usually most of the symptoms go away.
Yeah, and that's a good point. Sodium is definitely one of those electrolytes that it's so important for us to replenish. And I think a lot of people have some misconceptions around sodium too. Sodium is really bad for our health, and that's another just thing that's not true for most people out there that have healthy kidneys. If you're eating a low carb diet, your body's going to regulate your mineral levels and your sodium levels, and get rid of any excess that you don't need. So that's an important thing to take into consideration when people have fear about salting their foods and stuff. Is that our body's very good at regulating these things. The only way the sodium is going to be causing a lot of problems in your health is that if you're having it in conjunction with a very high carb diet. But when we're eating a low carb diet, there's such a big need for this mineral. So that's a great one to add.
Yeah. Any parting advice for our listeners who want to be on a keto diet, who want to start keto diet, or just something that you feel maybe is important to communicate to a lot of people in keto community?
Yeah, so I think the best thing to do is to try to earlier in the episode, I made the recommendation to just eat real food and get an approved food list. I think that's the best thing you can do to start. I think plugging yourself into a community is another great way. When you have a community around you of people who, when you first start keto, it can be a bit daunting to go out with friends and family who are, just not sure about the way that you're eating, or they're confused about it. Maybe they take jabs at you here and there. So it's nice to have a community around you that can make you feel comfortable in what you're doing with your health. So I think that's another important recommendation. But, also, like I mentioned at the beginning, I think educating yourself is also really important. When you know the why, everything becomes a lot more powerful. I think that the more this low carb keto conversation goes and the more that it gets out there, we start forgetting the why. We just know that keto is good for weight loss and it's good for these things. But when we don't know why, the diet really loses its power. So I think educating yourself is a really big thing. And we mentioned at the beginning the Keto Answers book is going to be a good way to help get you a lot of answers to questions that you have along the way. And then that Keto Kickstart that we have on the Perfect Keto website is also going to be just a great way to help walk you through your first month of keto and just kind of help you start the diet in the best way possible.
Yeah, and again, I just want to advise folks to get this book because it covered also for myself personally, even though I've been in keto community, and reading all the books and research for quite a while, it just put a lot of pieces together. And also you address, things like what are different types of keto diet, like what is cyclic keto, targeted keto, like how modified Atkins, or how should women approach keto, and all of this, finer details, or, quality of food, how does that affect your health and your keto journey. So supplements on keto, a lot of really great practical advice in the book. So I love it. It's like, kind of like a part of my keto encyclopedia that I collect different books and articles, and so it's definitely, I refer back to it all the time. It's amazing work. So thank you guys for writing it and putting it out in the world.
Yeah, well, thank you. I appreciate the kind words on that. That really means a lot to us.
Yeah. Thank you, Chris, again for the interviewer, and I'm going to share with our listeners all the links that you mentioned.